Ariana Cole's hands went cold the moment her eyes landed on the contract. The champagne flutes on her tray caught the light from the crystal chandelier overhead, throwing prismatic shadows across the polished oak table. She should set them down, nod respectfully, and retreat through the double doors to the kitchen where women like her belonged. In 4 months of serving in Min Jae Kang's private conference room, she'd perfected the performance of invisibility, present but peripheral, necessary but unnoticed. But that clause. Section 4, subsection B. Her breath caught. The words swam and sharpened in her vision like glass coming into focus before it cuts. Eminent domain facilitation. She knew that language. It lived in her nightmares. Those exact words had destroyed her father, stripped him of his property, his firm, his heartbeat. Those words had killed him as surely as if someone had put a gun to his head, just slower, more legal, wrapped in municipal letterhead and court seals.
No.
Not again. This couldn't be happening again. Min Jae's hand moved toward the pen. His fingers, long, controlled, impossibly steady, reached for the signature line. The lawyer across from him, a white man in a charcoal suit whose name she'd never been told, smiled like the deal was already closed. Like the trap had already sprung. Ariana's pulse hammered against her collarbone. Stay silent.
Pour the champagne.
Disappear. But her father's face materialized behind her eyes. That hollow expression during those final months. The way his voice had cracked when he whispered, "They buried it in the fine print, baby." By the time I understood what I'd signed, everything was already gone. The pen touched paper. "Excuse me, sir." Her voice sliced through the low murmur of negotiation. "But this clause is a trap." The room went still. Min Jae Kang's hand stopped mid-stroke. His head turned slowly, dark eyes locking onto her from across the table. The easy authority in his expression shifted, hardened, into something cold and deadly. 6 feet of coiled danger in a tailored black suit. The kind of man who'd built an empire on reading people, on knowing the precise moment someone was lying to him. His voice, when it came, was quieter than she'd ever heard it. Quieter and infinitely more dangerous. "What did you just say?" What secret was the waitress hiding behind her sharp vest and careful silence? Why did she recognize legal language sophisticated enough to slip past Min Jae Kang's own attorneys? And what would the most dangerous man in Chicago do now that she'd spoken words that could unravel his entire deal? The answers would demolish the carefully constructed walls between her past and present. The truth would expose a conspiracy reaching into the highest levels of city government. But first, Ariana Cole had to survive the next 60 seconds. Welcome back, my fierce hearts and midnight dreamers. Before we dive deeper, make sure you're subscribed, hit that like button, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Every like, every share, every word you leave helps us keep bringing these dangerous romances and high-stakes betrayals to life. So dim the lights, settle in, and get ready. Because tonight, I'm taking you into a world where contracts kill, councilmen scheme in shadows, and a disgraced attorney and a mafia boss will burn a city to ash for justice and love. 3 months earlier, Ariana had stood outside Kong Enterprises with $43 in her checking account and a forged resume in her trembling hands. The building rose before her, dark glass and brutal modern lines, the kind of place where power concentrated itself into a single address. Where fortunes were made over bourbon, where the men inside shaped Chicago from behind closed doors while the rest of the city pretended not to notice. She clutched her fabricated work history, each line carefully constructed to show only the acceptable version of her life. Waitress at the Drake Hotel, night shifts at a diner in Bronzeville, hostess for corporate catering. Everything else, everything that mattered, had been surgically removed. The hiring manager, A sharp-eyed Korean woman named Ji-won Park studied her with the expression of someone who'd evaluated hundreds of desperate women and knew exactly what to look for. You understand discretion? Yes, ma'am. What you see here stays here. What you hear here stays here. No questions. No curiosity. No conversations outside these walls. Ji-won's gaze didn't waver. Mr. Kong values invisibility in his staff. Your past, your opinions, your very existence, none of it matters except when you're needed.
Can you do that?
Ariana met her eyes with the quiet dignity of someone who'd already lost everything and was simply moving through the wreckage. I need this job. I won't cause any problems. And she hadn't. For 3 months, Ariana Cole had been the perfect ghost. She arrived at 5:30 each morning, prepared the private conference rooms, served power lunches where territorial disputes were negotiated in corporate euphemisms. She cleaned up after late dinners where deals were sealed with handshakes that meant more than signatures. She ate her staff meal in silence. She changed in the narrow staff room. She left through the service entrance at 4 p.m., never lingering, never looking back. She never paused when Min-jae held court in the executive lounge, his presence commanding the room's complete attention, men twice his age deferring to him with barely concealed respect and fear. She never reacted when conversations drifted through open doors, discussions about property acquisitions that skirted legality, about city officials who owed favors, about competitors who'd made fatal errors in judgment. She'd built a wall between who she was and who she'd been. Between Ariana Cole, Waitress, and Ariana Cole, former real estate litigation specialist at Brennan and Associates, one of Chicago's most aggressive firms, where she'd been brilliant before she'd been blacklisted. The wall had felt solid.
Permanent.
Necessary for survival. But walls only hold until something strikes them hard enough. And Section 4, subsection B struck like a wrecking ball. Because those words, that specific, carefully crafted legal language, were identical to the trap that had killed her father. Not metaphorically killed. Actually killed.
Slowly.
Legally. With documents instead of bullets. The clause that had stripped him of his commercial property, his life's work, his reason to keep breathing. She couldn't watch it happen again. Not even to save herself. Not even standing in front of Min-jae Kong, who could erase her from existence with a single phone call. The moment she spoke, the developer went quiet. The ambient conversation died. Min-jae set down the pen with deliberate care and rose from his chair. He crossed the room in 3 measured steps. Unhurried, controlled, predatory. He stopped close enough that she could smell cedar and something darker. Close enough that the heat radiating from his body made her skin prickle with awareness and warning. You recognize something. Not a question. His voice had dropped to a lethal whisper that made her pulse spike. In my contract. Explain.
Now.
Every survival instinct screamed at her to lie, to backtrack, to drop the tray and run for the exit and disappear into the Chicago streets forever. But another part of her, the part that had spent 2 years in hiding, the part that still woke up choking on dreams of her father's funeral, the part that was so exhausted from being invisible, refused to break. Section 4, subsection B, she said, forcing her voice steady even as her hands trembled on the tray. The eminent domain facilitation clause. It looks like standard protective language for municipal compliance. But it's not. She made herself meet his eyes. Those black, unreadable eyes that had ordered terrible things without flinching. The trigger language is asymmetric. May be subject to versus shall be considered. The phrasing means the city can invoke eminent domain proceedings against your property after you purchase it, but you can't challenge the valuation methodology. They'll offer fair market value, but the appraisal method is specified in subsection C, and it's designed to fail. Min-jae's expression didn't change. But something shifted behind his eyes. A spark of recognition, calculation, and something far more dangerous. Interest. And you know this how? Ariana's throat tightened. This was the moment. The cliff's edge. Once she spoke the truth, there would be no going back to invisibility, no returning to safety. But her father's memory deserved better than her silence. Because, she said quietly, that exact clause destroyed my father. And I watched him die trying to fight it. Min-jae dismissed everyone with a single gesture. The lawyer gathered his briefcase, face tight with frustration. Ji-hai appeared at the door to collect the champagne tray from Ariana's trembling hands, her expression carefully blank. Within 30 seconds, the room emptied until only 2 people remained. Ariana stood on one side of the table, Min-jae on the other. The chandelier cast sharp shadows across his face, turning his features into something carved from stone and menace. Sit. He pointed to the chair's lawyer had vacated. She sat. Not because he'd commanded it, but because her legs wouldn't hold her much longer. Min-jae circled the table slowly, predator assessing prey. He stopped behind her chair, close enough that she could feel his presence like heat from a furnace. You have exactly 1 chance to tell me the truth.
Who sent you?
Tae-suk? The West Side crew? Which one of my enemies planted you here? No one sent me. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. I needed a job. This was the only place that didn't run background checks deep enough to find what I was running from. And what are you running from? His hand appeared beside her face, sliding the contract across the table. What kind of waitress reads municipal acquisition clauses like she wrote them herself? The lie she'd rehearsed for 3 years sat on her tongue, ready and polished. But exhaustion made her reckless. Or maybe it was the way her father's ghost wouldn't stop screaming in her memory. Ariana Kennedy. She watched her real name land like a grenade between them. Not Cole.
Kennedy.
I was a senior associate at Brennan and Cross, real estate litigation. I specialized in municipal land disputes and eminent domain defense. Min-jae moved around to face her, his expression unreadable. Was. Past tense. My father was Marcus Kennedy, owned a commercial property in Bronzeville. 3 years ago, he signed a development deal with a city-backed investor. 6 months later, the city filed eminent domain proceedings. The appraisal came back at 40% of market value. He fought it for 2 years. Lost everything. Then he had a heart attack in the courthouse parking lot. She forced herself to meet Min-jae's eyes. The same clause that killed him is sitting in your contract. Section 4, subsection B. Word for word. Something flickered across Min-jae's face. Not sympathy, but calculation. You recognized the pattern. That's why you broke cover. I couldn't watch it happen again. Not even to stay invisible. He leaned against the table, arms crossed, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. You said you were blacklisted.
Why?
Because I tried to prove my father's case was fraud. I found documentation showing the appraiser was paid by the investor's shell company. I took it to my firm's partners. Her laugh came out bitter. They told me to drop it or find another career. The investor was their client. I went to the state bar instead. Within a week, I was fired for falsifying billable hours. No firm in Chicago would touch me after that. Min-jae was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had shifted from interrogation to negotiation. Who was the investor? Northside Development Group. But the real owner is Councilman Richard Stone. He's been using that clause to seize properties along the South Side Transit Corridor for 5 years. And you can prove this. It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. If I had access to the right documents, yes. The pattern is there. He just buries it under enough shell companies and legal distance that no one connects the pieces. Min Jae pushed off the table and extended his hand. Not for a handshake, but palm up an offering. Then connect them. Work for me. Find every property he's stolen, every clause he's hidden, every politician he's paid off. Build me a case that destroys him completely. Ariana stared at his hand like it might bite her. Why would you trust me? Because you risked everything to save a stranger from a trap you recognized. His eyes held hers, dark and unwavering. Because you want justice for your father, and I want blood from the man who thought he could steal from me. Our interests align. And if they don't, his smile was cold and sharp as a blade. Then you'll discover why people fear my name. But until that moment, Ariana Kennedy, you have my protection. No one touches you. No one threatens you. You're under my shield now. She took his hand. His grip was firm, warm, absolute. Then let's burn his empire to ash. The war room occupied the entire third floor of Min Jae's building, accessible only by private elevator and biometric scan. Ariana stepped into a space that looked like a Pentagon briefing room had collided with a law library. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Chicago skyline, but blackout shades could descend with a button press. A massive glass table dominated the center, surrounded by ergonomic chairs. One wall held monitors, another housed filing cabinets, with military-grade locks. Min Jae's second-in-command, a sharp-eyed man named Dae-young, handed her a tablet without preamble. Everything we could pull on Northside Development Group. Property records, corporate filings, LLC registrations. It's a maze. Mazes have patterns. Ariana swiped through the files, her litigation instincts awakening like muscles remembering movement. You just have to find the thread. For 6 hours, she worked in silence. Min Jae sat across from her, making calls in Korean, his voice alternating between velvet persuasion and steel command. Occasionally, he'd glance her way, watching her work with an intensity that should have made her uncomfortable but somehow didn't. She built a spreadsheet. Property addresses in one column, acquisition dates in another, recorded owners in a third. Then she cross-referenced deed transfers with city council meeting minutes, zoning variance approvals, eminent domain filings. The pattern emerged like bones rising through shallow water. 23 properties. She looked up, finding Min Jae's eyes already on her. Over 5 years. All along the planned Green Line extension route. Stone's companies acquired them for an average of 42% below market value. Min Jae leaned forward.
How?
The same playbook every time. First, a private developer makes an offer to purchase. If the owner refuses, the city suddenly discovers code violations, zoning issues, environmental concerns. Then comes the eminent domain filing, always with the same asymmetric clause buried in the settlement terms. The appraisal methodology is rigged from the start. She pulled up a map on the tablet, dots marking each property like a cancer spreading through the south side. Once stone shell companies own the land, they flip it to the transit authority at triple the price. The taxpayers fund the theft, and Stone pockets the difference. Dae-young swore softly in Korean. There's more. Ariana's fingers flew across the screen. The appraiser used in all 23 cases is the same firm. Midwest Property Valuation Services. But look at their corporate registration. She turned the tablet so Min Jae could see. Filed 6 months before the first property seizure. The registered agent is a law firm that shares office space with Stone's campaign headquarters. And the majority shareholder is a trust managed by Tae-suk. Min Jae's voice went flat and cold. Victor Tae-suk. The name hung in the air like cordite after a gunshot. Ariana looked between Min Jae and Dae-young. Who is Tae-suk? My competition. Min-jae stood and walked to the windows, hands in his pockets, silhouetted against the city lights. He controls the west side. I control the south loop. We've maintained a careful balance for 3 years. He doesn't cross into my territory. I don't cross into his. He turned, and his expression was pure calculated fury. But if he's partnered with Stone to systematically steal properties in my neighborhoods, he's not just crossing a line. He's declaring war. It's bigger than territory. Ariana pulled up another file. Look at the property owners. 80% are minority-owned businesses. Black, Korean, Latino families who've held these properties for generations. Stone and Taesuk aren't just stealing land. They're ethnically cleansing the corridor to make it profitable for white developers. She felt the old rage rising, the fury that had cost her career. This is gentrification as organized crime. Min-jae returned to the table, placing both palms flat on the glass. Can you prove it? In a way that holds up in federal court? If this pattern is consistent, this isn't just fraud. It's RICO. She met his eyes. Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. You prove a pattern of racketeering activity, a continuous criminal enterprise. Stone, Taesuk, the appraisal company, the shell corporations, they're all part of the same conspiracy. That means federal prosecution, asset forfeiture, and RICO's treble damages. Every victim can sue for triple their actual losses. How do we prove the connection? We need the financial records. Wire transfers between Stone and Taesuk's entities. Communication records showing coordination. And we need testimony from someone inside the operation. She pulled up the list of seized properties again. We start by interviewing the victims. 23 families who lost everything. Some will be too afraid to talk, but others. Her voice cracked slightly. Others will want what I want. Justice for what was stolen. Min-jae studied her for a long moment. You understand what you're proposing? Taking down a sitting councilman and the most dangerous Russian mobster in Chicago? Stone has immunity, political connections that reach the governor's office. Taesuk has an army. And you have me. Ariana stood, matching his intensity. I know municipal law, federal racketeering statutes, and how to build a case that's legally bulletproof. Stone used the law as a weapon against my father. I'm going to use it to destroy him. Something shifted in Min-jae's expression, a flicker of what might have been admiration or might have been hunger. Then we move carefully. Document everything. Build the case piece by piece until it's unbreakable. He extended his hand again, but this time it felt less like a business arrangement and more like a vow. We take them both down, Ariana. Stone and Taesuk. Together. She clasped his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip. Together. Outside the windows, Chicago glittered in the darkness, beautiful and corrupt, a city built on stolen land and broken promises. But somewhere in that maze of light and shadow, justice was still possible. They just had to be willing to burn everything down to find it. The document arrived in a manila envelope, hand-delivered to the war room by a courier who disappeared before Dae-young could ask questions. No return address. Just Ariana's name written in block letters across the front. She opened it at the glass table while Min-jae watched from across the room, instinct already telling her this was wrong. This was a trap. This was going to hurt. The first page was a non-disclosure agreement, dated 3 years ago, 2 months after her father's funeral. The signature at the bottom made her stomach drop through the floor. Dorothy Kennedy. Her mother.
No.
The word came out broken. No, this can't be real. Min-jae crossed to her side in 3 strides. What is it? Ariana couldn't speak. She just turned the pages, each one a fresh knife between her ribs. The NDA bound Dorothy Kennedy to silence regarding any and all matters related to the property dispute of Marcus Kennedy. In exchange for her signature, she received $200,000 and a release of all claims against Northside Development Group. But it was the next document that shattered her completely. A quitclaim deed. Dorothy Kennedy transferring all her surviving spouse's interest in the Bronzeville property to a shell company owned by Richard Stone. She'd signed away her husband's legacy, the land he'd died fighting for money and silence. The papers slipped from Ariana's hands, scattering across the table like evidence of a murder. She sold him. Her voice sounded distant, disconnected from her body. My father died in a courthouse parking lot fighting for that property, and 2 months later, my mother took their money and signed it all away. Min-jae gathered the papers, reading quickly, his jaw tightening with each page. This is why they could bury the case so completely. Your mother had standing to sue. She owned half the marital property. With her signature on an NDA, there was no one left to fight. She told me she didn't have the strength to keep going, that the legal battle had already cost us everything. Ariana's hands shook. I believed her. I thought she was grieving. But she wasn't grieving, she was cashing out. The timing is surgical. Min-jae laid the documents in order, his tone shifting into analytical mode. They waited until your father died, until you were fired and discredited. Then they approached your mother when she was isolated and vulnerable. This wasn't opportunistic. It was planned. Does it matter? Ariana stood abruptly, pacing to the windows. Chicago sprawled below, indifferent to her pain. She had a choice. She chose money over his memory, over the truth, over me. It matters because it proves how far Stone will go to protect his conspiracy. Min-jae moved beside her, close enough that she could feel his presence, steadying her. He identified every possible threat and neutralized them. Your father through litigation and stress. You through professional destruction. Your mother through financial pressure and legal silencing. This document isn't just a betrayal, Ariana. It's evidence. She turned to look at him, tears burning behind her eyes. Evidence of what? That my mother is complicit? That my entire family was broken by these men, and we just let them win. Evidence that Stone knew exactly what he was doing. That this wasn't negligence or bureaucratic oversight. This was intentional, systematic, criminal. Min-jae's voice dropped, gentle but firm. Your mother's signature on that NDA doesn't erase where father fought for. It doesn't invalidate his claims. And it doesn't mean you have to stop. I spent 3 years hiding because I thought I was protecting her. Because I thought if I stayed quiet, if I disappeared, they'd leave her alone. Ariana's voice cracked. But she didn't need protecting. She was already on their side. Then stop protecting her. Min-jae caught her chin, tilting her face toward his. His touch was surprisingly gentle, at odds with the steel in his voice. Stop carrying her choices as your burden. She made her decision 3 years ago. Now you make yours. The tears spilled over. She hadn't cried since her father's funeral, had locked every emotion behind walls of survival and silence. But something in Min-jae's steady gaze, in his unflinching presence, made those walls crack. I don't know if I can do this. The admission felt like weakness, like failure. Every time I think I'm strong enough, something new breaks me. You interrupted my contract signing to save a stranger from a trap you recognized. Min-jae's thumb brushed away a tear with startling tenderness. You spent 6 hours building a federal case against the most powerful men in Chicago. You've survived 3 years of hiding and erasure and grief. You're not broken, Ariana. You're a weapon that's been waiting for the right target. She wanted to believe him. God, She wanted to believe that her pain could become power, that her father's death could mean something more than just another casualty of corruption. What if we lose? The question came out small, afraid. What if Stone has too many protections, too many connections? What if my mother's betrayal means we can't prove what they did to my father? Then we don't prove what they did 3 years ago. We prove what they're doing now. Min-jae released her face but caught her hand instead, his grip firm and grounding. 23 properties, Ariana. 23 families. Your father's case might be closed, but theirs aren't. We build the RICO case on current crimes, and your father's property becomes part of the pattern. His name gets cleared when we expose the entire conspiracy, using his death as evidence. The thought twisted something in her chest, but there was logic in it too. Justice in it. Using his death as proof that this has been happening for years. That Stone's operation is exactly what we claim it is: systematic, intentional, criminal. Min-jae pulled her back toward the table, toward the scattered documents that had destroyed her minutes ago. Your mother's NDA included a confidentiality clause. Stone paid her to stay silent about the circumstances of the settlement. That silence is consciousness of guilt. It's obstruction. It's another count in the indictment. Ariana stared at the papers with new eyes. Not just betrayal. Evidence. Ammunition. We can use this. We can bury him with it. Min-jae's smile was cold and sharp. Stone thought he was cleaning up loose ends. But he just handed us proof of his methods. Now we find every other family he pressured into silence. Every other NDA he purchased. And we show the federal prosecutor a pattern of intimidation and payoffs that spans 5 years. She took a shaky breath, feeling something shift inside her. The grief was still there, raw and aching. But beneath it, fury was rising like a tide. My mother sold my father's legacy for $200,000. Ariana's voice steadied, hardened. Let's make sure Richard Stone pays millions for his freedom and loses anyway. Min-jae's expression held something that looked almost like pride. Now you sound like someone I'd go to war with. Good. She gathered the documents, her hands no longer shaking. Because we're about to start a battle that burns this city's corruption to the ground. Outside, night had fully fallen. But in the war room, under the cold fluorescent lights, justice was taking shape, sharp, relentless, and absolutely unforgiving. The press conference was scheduled for 10 in the morning at the Chicago Cultural Center, a public venue where Stone's influence couldn't reach to cancel it. Ariana stood backstage in a navy suit she hadn't worn since her days at Brennan and Cross, the fabric hanging slightly loose after 3 years of waitress wages and survival eating. Min-jae had offered to buy her something new, but she'd refused. She wanted to walk out there as herself, not as someone he'd created. You don't have to do this. Min-jae adjusted his tie in the mirror, perfectly composed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her first car. I can be the face of this. Keep you protected.
No.
Ariana checked her notes one final time, though she'd memorized every word. Stone discredited me once by making me invisible. I won't let him do it again. These families need to see someone who understands what they lost. Someone who looks like them. Someone who paid the same price. Through the curtain, she could hear the murmur of assembled reporters. Every major Chicago outlet had sent someone. A few national correspondents, too, drawn by the spectacle of a Korean businessman and a former lawyer publicly accusing a sitting councilman of racketeering. Dae-young appeared at the doorway. We'll live in 2 minutes. The federal courthouse confirmed they received the filing at 9:58. It's official. Min-jae turned to Ariana, his dark eyes searching her face. Last chance to turn back. I've been turning back for 3 years. She squared her shoulders. Today I move forward. He smiled, something warm and dangerous and proud. Then let's show Chicago what corruption looks like when someone finally names it. They walked out together into a wall of camera flashes and shouted questions. The stage held a podium, a table stacked with documents, and 2 chairs. Behind them, a projection screen displayed a map of the South Side, 23 properties marked in red like wounds across the city's skin. Min-jae spoke first, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made reporters stop interrupting and start listening. This morning at 9:58 a.m., we filed a federal RICO lawsuit against Councilman Richard Stone, Northside Development Group, Midwest Property Valuation Services, and 14 associated shell companies. The suit alleges a 5-year conspiracy to systematically defraud property owners through coordinated abuse of eminent domain proceedings and municipal corruption. He gestured to the screen. 23 properties. Over $40 million in stolen equity. Dozens of families displaced from generational wealth. This is an urban renewal. This is organized crime wearing a city council badge. The reporters erupted with questions, but Min-jae raised a hand. The details are in the 200-page complaint filed this morning. But the human cost of this conspiracy can't be captured in legal language. For that, I'll turn this over to someone who has lived it. Ariana stepped to the podium. Every camera swung toward her. She saw recognition flash across a few faces, reporters who'd covered her firing, her father's death, her disappearance from Chicago's legal scene. She watched them make the connection in real time. My name is Ariana Kennedy. Her voice didn't shake. 3 years ago, my father Marcus Kennedy died in a courthouse parking lot after a 2-year legal battle to save his commercial property in Bronzeville. The city had filed eminent domain proceedings against him, offering less than half the property's value. He fought because he knew it was theft disguised as civic progress. He was right. She pulled up a document on the screen behind her. This is the settlement agreement my father was pressured to sign before his death. Section 4, subsection B contains an asymmetric eminent domain facilitation clause that stripped him of the ability to challenge the city's valuation methodology. The exact same clause appears in all 23 properties we're documenting today. Word for word, comma for comma. A reporter shouted a question about whether she was still licensed to practice law. Others wanted to know about her connection to Min-jae. She ignored them all. For 3 years, I stayed silent. I believed I had no power, no voice, no way to fight men who controlled courts and councils and entire neighborhoods. But silence is what they count on. Silence is how corruption becomes policy. Ariana's hands gripped the podium, steady and sure. I'm done being silent. These 23 families are done being silent. We're asking the federal government to investigate what the city refused to see, that Councilman Stone has been running a criminal enterprise from his public office, stealing from the communities he swore to serve. What about your mother's NDA? A reporter from the Tribune had done his homework. She settled her claims and signed away her rights to your father's property. The question landed like a punch, but Ariana had prepared for it. My mother signed that NDA under duress, 2 months after burying her husband, pressured by men who knew she was vulnerable and alone. That NDA is Exhibit 47 in our federal complaint. It's not evidence of consent. It's evidence of intimidation. It's proof that Councilman Stone knew his actions were criminal and paid for silence to cover his tracks. Min-jae stepped beside her, a united front. We're not asking for public opinion. We're presenting federal prosecutors with evidence of a RICO conspiracy, a pattern of racketeering activity that includes fraud, extortion, and money laundering. Councilman Stone has immunity from civil suits in his official capacity, but RICO prosecution is criminal, and no one is immune from federal criminal charges. What about Victor Tezsuk? Another reporter, sharper than the others. Your filing names him as a co-conspirator. That's the head of the West Side Syndicate. Are you accusing a councilman and a Russian mobster of working together? We're not accusing. Ariana pulled up another document. We're proving. Tez-Suk owns the majority share in Midwest Property Valuation Services through a series of shell corporations. That appraisal firm was used in every single property seizure. The financial connections are documented. The conspiracy is real. The room exploded with questions, accusations, demands for comment. Ariana felt the weight of every camera, every word being broadcast live across the city. Stone would be watching. Tez-Suk would be watching. Everyone who'd bet on her staying broken and silent would be watching her stand in public daylight and name them all. Min-jae leaned toward the microphone. We'll take no further questions. The evidence speaks for itself. Read the filing. Follow the money. And watch what happens when 23 families stop accepting injustice as inevitable. They walked off stage together, leaving chaos behind them. Backstage, Dae-young was already fielding calls from other attorneys, from community organizers, from families who'd lost properties and finally saw a way to fight back. Ariana's phone buzzed. A blocked number. She answered, knowing who it would be. You just signed your death warrant. Richard Stone's voice was cold, controlled fury. I will destroy you and everyone you love. You already did that once, Councilman. Ariana's voice was steel wrapped in silk. But I survived. And now I'm coming for everything you stole. She hung up and turned to find Min-jae watching her, something fierce and possessive in his expression. Now the real war begins, he said quietly. Ariana smiled, sharp and unafraid. Good. I've been ready for 3 years. The interview aired 48 hours after the press conference. Dorothy Kennedy sat in a tastefully decorated living room Ariana didn't recognize, wearing pearls and a cream blouse that looked expensive. Her mother had aged since she'd last seen her, more gray in her hair, deeper lines around her mouth, but her posture was perfect, her hands folded demurely in her lap. The interviewer was Sandra Mitchell from Channel 7, known for her sympathetic approach to human interest stories. Mrs. Kennedy, your daughter made serious allegations against Councilman Stone at a press conference this week. Were you aware she was planning this? Dorothy's eyes glistened with practiced tears. I haven't spoken to Ariana in over 2 years. After her father passed, she became consumed with blame. She couldn't accept that Marcus made poor business decisions, that his legal battle was unwinnable. She needed someone to be the villain in her grief. Ariana watched from Min-jae's penthouse, the tablet shaking in her hands. Dae-young had found the clip within minutes of it going live. Now it was playing on every news outlet in Chicago. So, you believe her accusations against Councilman Stone are unfounded? Mitchell asked, her tone gentle, coaxing. I believe my daughter is in pain. Dorothy dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Losing her father destroyed her. Losing her career only made it worse. She's weaponizing her grief, lashing out at successful men who had nothing to do with Marcus's failures. It breaks my heart to watch her do this publicly. She claims you signed a non-disclosure agreement and sold your interest in your late husband's property. Is that true? I signed a settlement agreement because I was drowning in debt and legal fees. Marcus's battle had bankrupted us. The city offered me a fair resolution, and I took it so I could survive. Ariana sees that as betrayal. I see it as self-preservation. Dorothy looked directly into the camera. I love my daughter, but she needs help, not a platform for conspiracy theories. The tablet slipped from Ariana's fingers, clattering on the marble floor. She stood abruptly, her breath coming in short, painful gasps. She called him a failure. She called his fight a failure. Min-jae moved to her side, steady and solid. She's reading from a script Stone wrote. Every word was calculated. She's my mother. Ariana's voice cracked. She's supposed to be on my side. She's supposed to remember who he was, what he fought for. Instead, she's on television telling the world he was a fool who made poor decisions. Because Stone is terrified. Min-jae caught her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. He's watching federal prosecutors review a 200-page RICO complaint. He's watching community organizers rally behind you. He's losing control of the narrative, so he's doing what powerful men always do. He's attacking your credibility through the person who can hurt you most. It's working. Ariana felt tears burning behind her eyes. By tomorrow, every outlet will be running stories about the disgraced lawyer with a vendetta. They'll say I'm mentally unstable, that I'm manipulating grief for attention. Everything we built at that press conference will be buried under my mother calling me a liar. Then we don't let her voice be the only one they hear. Min-jae released her shoulders and pulled out his phone. Dae-young, I need every family we interviewed for the RICO case. Get them ready to go on camera. Tonight. Ariana stared at him. What are you doing? Giving you an army. He was already typing, messages flying to contacts across the city. Stone thinks your mother's testimony will isolate you. He thinks people will see you as an outlier, one bitter daughter with an agenda. He's wrong. Within 2 hours, Min-jae had orchestrated something Ariana hadn't thought possible. 7 families whose properties had been seized agreed to speak publicly. They gathered in a community center on the south side, a space Min-jae owned but had kept deliberately modest. Folding chairs, fluorescent lights, a single camera set up by a freelance journalist who owed him a favor. Mrs. Patricia Odom spoke first, a black woman in her 70s who'd lost her family's restaurant. I watched that interview with Dorothy Kennedy. I understand her pain. But I also know what it's like to fight City Hall and lose everything. Ariana Kennedy didn't weaponize grief. She weaponized knowledge. She gave us legal language for what they did to us. She gave us hope that someone finally understands. Then came Marcus Chun, who'd lost his dry cleaning business. My wife signed an NDA too. Stone's lawyers came to us when we were broken and desperate. They offered money and made us promise silence. I don't blame Dorothy Kennedy for signing. I blame the men who made that signature the price of survival. One by one, they spoke. Different faces, different properties, same story. The asymmetric clause. The low-ball appraisal. The pressure to settle. The NDAs purchased with guilt and desperation. The video went live at midnight. By morning, it had been picked up by 3 national news networks and shared 40,000 times on social media. The narrative had shifted from unstable daughter attacks councilman to systematic conspiracy silences victims. Ariana watched the coverage from Min-jae's living room, exhausted and overwhelmed. He sat beside her on the leather sofa, close enough that their shoulders touched, a glass of whiskey in his hand. You did this in 2 hours, she said quietly. Coordinated 7 families, secured a venue, got media distribution.
How?
I've spent 15 years building a network in the city. Tonight, I used it for something that mattered. He took a sip of whiskey, his profile sharp in the dim light. Your mother tried to bury you. I made sure you had people standing with you when you came back up. Something in her chest cracked open, a feeling she'd carefully avoided for 3 years because feeling anything made survival harder. But Min-jae wasn't just an ally or an employer. He was becoming something more dangerous and necessary. Someone she trusted. Someone she needed. Why are you doing this? Her voice came out softer than intended. The lawsuit, the protection, the counter-narrative. You could have just walked away from Stone's deal and found another property. Why go to war? Min-jae turned to face her, his dark eyes intense. Because when you interrupted that contract signing, you didn't do it for money or leverage or fear. You did it because you couldn't watch someone else suffer the way your father suffered. That kind of courage is rare. That kind of integrity is worth protecting. I'm not courageous. I'm angry. Anger becomes courage when you aim it at the right target. He set down his glass and caught her hand, his thumb tracing her knuckles. Your mother tried to make you small again, make you doubt yourself. But I've watched you build a federal case, stand in front of cameras, survive character assassination. You're not small, Ariana. You're a force that Stone didn't see coming until it was too late. The tears came then, hot and unstoppable. Not tears of weakness, but of relief. For 3 years she'd carried everything alone. The grief, the rage, the shame of her mother's betrayal. But Min-jae's hand was steady in hers, his presence anchoring her when she felt like she might fly apart. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. How to fight this publicly and survive the cost of it. You don't do it alone. Min-jae pulled her closer, and she didn't resist. She let herself lean into him, let herself feel the warmth of another person who saw her scars and didn't flinch. You have me. You have those families. You have a case that's legally bulletproof and morally righteous. Stone can use your mother against you, but he can't erase the evidence. And he can't break what's already survived being broken once. She looked up at him, close enough to see gold flecks in his dark eyes. What if we lose? Then we lose fighting instead of hiding. But we won't lose. His voice dropped, intimate and fierce. Because men like Stone make one critical mistake. They think power comes from crushing people into silence. But real power comes from people who refuse to stay silent no matter the cost. That's you, Ariana. That's who you've always been. She kissed him. Or maybe he kissed her. It didn't matter who moved first. What mattered was the way his hand cupped the back of her neck, the way she gripped his shirt like he was the only solid thing in a world trying to sweep her away, the way 3 years of loneliness and fear dissolved in the heat of his mouth on hers. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Min-jae touched his forehead to hers. We finish this together, he whispered. Whatever comes next. Together. Together, she agreed and believed it. The tip came from an unlikely source, a city clerk named Michael Reeves who'd worked in the municipal archives for 23 years. He'd watched the press conference, recognized his own complicity in the pattern, and couldn't stay silent anymore. His call came through to Daeyoung at 4 in the afternoon, voice shaking with fear and urgency. Stone's people are coming for the archives tonight. Midnight. They're going to burn the physical records from 2019 to 2024. All the original deeds, transfer documents, appraisal reports. Everything you'd need to prove the pattern goes up in smoke. Min-jae had the phone on speaker in the war room. You're certain about the timeline? I heard them talking in the hallway. They think I'm too insignificant to notice. But I've been watching the properties you listed in your lawsuit. I know where every file is stored. If those records burn, you can't prove continuous enterprise. The RICO case falls apart. Ariana's blood went cold. Digital copies? The city's been converting records for 5 years, but the 2019 to 2021 files aren't fully digitized. The originals are all you have. And Stone knows it. After Reeves hung up with a promise to leave a service entrance unlocked, Min-jae turned to Ariana with an expression that was half calculation, half concern. We can call the federal prosecutors. Have them request the records officially. Stone has friends in the U.S. Attorney's Office. By the time they process a request, those files will be ash. Ariana was already pulling up City Hall's floor plans on her tablet. We go in. We get the files. We get out before his people arrive. You're talking about breaking into a government building. I'm talking about preserving evidence of a federal crime. She met his eyes, steady and certain. You've done worse for less important reasons. Min-jae's smile was sharp and dangerous.
Yes.
But I've never done it with a lawyer as my accomplice. This feels like corruption of counsel. Then consider me corrupted. Ariana traced the route from the service entrance to the archives. We have 8 hours to plan and execute. Are you with me? He reached across the table and caught her hand. Always. They entered City Hall at 11:53, dressed in black and moving like shadows through hallways Ariana had walked as a law student during internships that felt like another lifetime. Min-jae moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd done this before, picking locks with tools that appeared from his jacket pocket, disabling security cameras with practiced precision. The archives occupied the entire basement level, row after row of filing cabinets and document boxes stretching into dimness. The air smelled of old paper and institutional neglect. Michael Reeves had left a hand-drawn map on the clerk's desk with red circles marking the relevant sections. 2019 property transfers, northeast corner. Appraisal reports, west wall. Eminent domain filings, center aisle. Ariana read the map by phone light, adrenaline making her hands steady instead of shaking. We need everything marked with Northside Development Group or any of its shell companies. They worked in silence, pulling files and stacking them in canvas bags Min-jae had brought. Ariana's legal training made her fast. She could scan a document label and know within seconds if it was relevant. Min-jae simply followed her lead, lifting boxes she couldn't reach, carrying weight she couldn't manage alone. 20 minutes in, they heard voices above them. Footsteps on the marble floors of the main level, moving toward the stairwell that led down to the archives. They're early. Min-jae's voice was barely a whisper. How much more do we need? Ariana looked at the half-filled bags, then at the rows of remaining files. At least 30 more documents. Maybe 5 minutes. We don't have 5 minutes. He was already pulling her toward the emergency exit at the far end of the room. We take what we have and leave now.
No.
She twisted out of his grip and ran back toward the center aisle, toward a box labeled Midwest Property Valuation, Contract Records 2019 to 2022. If Tesseck's appraisal company had contracts with the city, if there was documentation of payment structures, kickback arrangements, anything that proved coordination between Stone and the Russian mobster. The stairwell door crashed open. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness. Male voices, at least 3 of them, speaking in urgent, clipped tones. Spread out. Find anyone down here and make it permanent. Then light it up. Min-jae appeared beside her like a ghost, grabbing the box she was reaching for while simultaneously pulling her down behind a filing cabinet. They crouched in shadow, barely breathing, as footsteps approached their position. One of Stone's men walked past, so close Ariana could smell cigarette smoke on his jacket. He carried a red gas can in one hand, a lighter in the other. 2 more men flanked him, both armed. Min-jae's hand moved to the small of his back, where Ariana knew he kept a gun. She caught his wrist and shook her head. Not unless there's no other choice. A shooting would bring police, questions, investigations that could compromise everything. The men moved deeper into the archives, pouring gasoline across filing cabinets and document boxes with methodical efficiency. The smell burned Ariana's nose, made her eyes water. They had maybe 60 seconds before the whole room became an inferno with them trapped inside. Min-jae pointed toward the emergency exit, then held up 3 fingers. 3 seconds. On my signal. The lead arsonist struck his lighter. Flame bloomed in the darkness, dancing across metal and paper. Min-jae grabbed Ariana's hand and ran. They sprinted down the center aisle as fire erupted behind them, heat chasing them like a living thing. One of the men shouted, saw them fleeing, raised his weapon. A shot cracked through the archive, the bullet sparking off a filing cabinet inches from Ariana's head. Min-jae shoved the emergency exit door open, dragging her through into a concrete stairwell. They took the stairs 3 at a time, the canvas bags of documents banging against their backs. Behind them, smoke poured through the doorway and fire alarms began screaming. They burst out of the building through a loading dock exit, gasping in cold night air that tasted like freedom. Min-jae's car was parked 2 blocks away, engine already running courtesy of a remote start Dae-young had installed for exactly this kind of emergency. They threw the bags in the trunk and peeled away from City Hall as fire trucks began converging on the building, sirens wailing into the Chicago night. In Min-jae's penthouse, they spread the stolen documents across the dining table, both still breathing hard, both smelling of smoke and adrenaline. Ariana's hands shook as she opened the first file, then the second, then the third. We got it. Her voice cracked with exhausted triumph. Contracts between the city and Midwest Property Valuation. Payment records showing Tessick's company received triple the standard rate for appraisals. Email correspondence between Stone's office and the appraisal firm coordinating which properties to target. She looked up at Min-jae, tears streaming down her soot-stained face. This is everything. This proves the conspiracy. This buries them both. Min-jae crossed to her, pulling her into his arms despite the smoke and sweat and fear still clinging to both of them. You almost died for those files. We almost died. She gripped his shirt, feeling his heart hammering against her palm. But we didn't. And now Stone can't destroy the evidence. Now the federal prosecutors have everything they need. He kissed her forehead, her temple, her mouth. Never again. We don't take risks like that again. We take whatever risks we have to. Ariana pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. Because this is bigger than us. Bigger than safety. 23 families are counting on these documents to get justice. Then we make sure justice is exactly what they get. Min-jae's expression hardened into something cold and absolute. Starting tomorrow, we hand this evidence to the FBI and watch Richard Stone's world collapse. Outside the windows, smoke rose from City Hall, visible across the skyline like a signal fire. But inside Min-jae's fortress, surrounded by documents they'd risked everything to save, Ariana felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Victory, sharp and real, and finally within reach. The meeting took place in neutral territory, a private room at the Peninsula Hotel, all marble and muted gold, the kind of place where powerful men made deals that would never see courtroom light. Ariana's instincts screamed at her the moment they walked in. Tae-suk sat at the head of the table like a king holding court, his silver-streaked hair perfectly styled, his expression carved from stone. 2 bodyguards flanked the door. Min-jae's hand pressed briefly against the small of her back, a warning, a reassurance, a promise. Kong SSI, Tae-suk said, his voice carrying the smooth courtesy that made him more dangerous than any thug. Thank you for accepting my invitation. And Ms. Cole. How lovely to finally meet the woman who's caused so much disruption. Cut the pleasantries, Min-jae said, pulling out Ariana's chair before taking his own. You said you had something we needed. I'm listening. Tae-suk smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. He slid a manila envelope across the polished table. It stopped directly in front of Ariana. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were photocopies, but not just any documents. Original appraisal reports. Emails between Councilman Stone and the city assessor. And there, paper clipped to the back, a handwritten ledger entry in her father's distinctive script, dated 2 weeks before the eminent domain seizure. Property appraised at $2.3 million by independent firm, Caldwell and Associates. City offer, $340,000. Discrepancy flagged with Attorney Morrison. Awaiting response. Her vision blurred. This was it. The smoking gun. Proof that her father had known the valuation was fraudulent, that he'd tried to fight it through proper channels, that he'd been silenced before he could expose the conspiracy. Where did you get this? Her voice came out raw. I've had it for 18 months, Tez-Suk said calmly. Acquired it from a very nervous clerk in the city assessor's office who understood the value of insurance. I've been waiting for the right moment to use it. And that moment is now. Min-jae's tone was flat, dangerous. What do you want? Tez-Suk leaned back, fingers steepled beneath his chin. The Kennedy Community Center. Full ownership transfer. I want the building, the land, and the naming rights. Ariana's breath stopped. The community center was more than property to Min-jae. It was his mother's legacy, the one piece of legitimate business he'd built in her memory. The place where kids from Bridgeport learned taekwondo and got hot meals and stayed off corners where Min-jae's own people recruited.
No.
The word tore from her throat before she could stop it. Absolutely not. We'll find another way. There is no other way, Tez-Suk interrupted, his gaze never leaving Min-jae. Without this evidence, Stone walks. His attorneys will bury your RICO case in motions for years. Your father's name stays ruined. Your mother's betrayal remains the only narrative.
He paused.
But with these documents, federal prosecutors will have him in custody within 72 hours. Min-jae's expression hadn't changed, but Ariana felt the tension radiating from him like heat from a furnace. His jaw was set, his hands perfectly still on the table, the kind of stillness that preceded violence.
Why?
Min-jae asked quietly. Why help us destroy Stone? He's been useful to you. Stone has become reckless. His son is worse. They draw attention I don't need. Tez-Suk's smile was thin and cold. Better to let them fall now, publicly, and distance myself from the debris. And acquiring your community center has been a long-term goal. This simply accelerates the timeline. You want to tear it down, Ariana said, her voice breaking. Turn it into condos or some luxury development. What I do with my property is my concern. Tez-Suk pushed a contract across the table. You have 48 hours to decide. After that, these documents disappear, and I make alternative arrangements with Councilman Stone that are far more profitable for both of us. The room fell silent except for the muted sound of traffic 18 floors below. Min-jae picked up the contract. Read it slowly. Set it down. When he looked at Ariana, his eyes held something she'd never seen before. Not the cold calculation of a strategist, not the predatory focus of a hunter, but something raw and almost tender. Your father, he said softly. If we don't do this, his name stays buried. If we do this, your mother's legacy gets erased. Ariana's throat burned. Min-jae, I can't let you. Yes, you can. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. I've spent my whole life building empires, taking territory, winning. But I've never had anything worth losing until you. His fingers tightened. Let me do this. Let me give you back what they took from your family. Tears blurred her vision. That center is everything to you.
No.
His voice dropped to a whisper meant only for her. You are. The words hit her like a physical blow, like every wall she'd built around her heart crumbling at once. Min-jae turned back to Tez-Suk, his expression hardening into the mask of a man who'd made his decision. I want it in writing. You provide the complete evidentiary package to the U.S. Attorney's Office through a secure intermediary. Once Stone is arrested and the documents are authenticated, I transfer the property. Acceptable. Tez-Suk inclined his head. I'll have my attorneys draft the amended terms. And one more thing. Min Jae's voice went lethal. If anything happens to Ariana, if she's threatened, followed, or touched, I will burn everything you've built to ash and scatter your organization to the wind. Do we understand each other? For the first time, something like respect flickered in Tessik's eyes. Perfectly. They left without another word. In the elevator, descending toward the lobby, Ariana finally let herself break. Min Jae pulled her against his chest, his hand cradling the back of her head as she shook with silent sobs. "I'm sorry," she whispered into his suit jacket. "I'm so sorry." "Don't." His lips brushed her hair. "I'd trade 1,000 buildings for your peace. For your father's name. For us." When she looked up at him, she saw the truth written in every hard line of his face. Min Jae Kong, the man who'd built an empire on never showing weakness, had just sacrificed his mother's legacy for her. And in that moment, Ariana understood what love actually meant. Not the romantic speeches or grand gestures from movies, but this, the quiet devastation of watching someone choose your healing over their own heart. "We'll get it back," she promised fiercely. "Someday, somehow, we'll get that center back." Min Jae smiled, sad and true. "I know, but right now, we have a councilman to destroy." The call came at 4:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, 70 hours after they'd signed Tessik's Devil's Bargain. Ariana jolted awake in Min Jae's penthouse, her heart already racing before her mind caught up. Min Jae was already reaching for his phone, his voice sharp and alert despite the hour. "Talk to me." She watched his face as he listened, saw the moment his expression shifted from tense anticipation to something cold and satisfied. When he ended the call, his eyes found hers in the dim light filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Stone's running. FBI intercepted communications 20 minutes ago. He's headed for O'Hare with his son, private charter scheduled for 6 a.m. to Sao Paulo." Min Jae was already moving, pulling on clothes with efficient precision. "Federal agents are moving to intercept. They want us there." Ariana's hands shook as she dressed. This was it. After 2 years of hiding, of silence, of carrying her father's ruined name like a weight around her neck, this was the moment everything changed. They made it to O'Hare's private aviation terminal in 38 minutes, Min Jae's driver breaking every traffic law with practiced ease. Federal agents had already established a perimeter. Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Chin met them at the entrance, her expression grim and triumphant in equal measure.
"They're inside," she said.
"Stone's trying to negotiate. Claims he has diplomatic connections, immunity, that we're violating protocol." She glanced at Ariana. "He's also demanding to know who provided the evidence. He knows someone burned him." "Let him wonder," Min Jae said flatly. They watched through reinforced glass as Richard Stone stood in the private terminal's executive lounge, his face red with rage and fear, his son Marcus pacing behind him like a caged animal. 2 rolling suitcases sat abandoned near the door. Around them, federal agents formed an unbreakable wall. "Richard Stone, Marcus Stone, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, racketeering, abuse of public office, and theft of property through fraudulent eminent domain proceedings." The lead agent's voice carried clearly through the glass. "You have the right to remain silent. This is a witch hunt." Stone's voice cracked. "I have friends in Washington in the governor's office. You're making a career-ending mistake. The only mistake was thinking you could hide behind your position forever." Sarah Chen's voice came through the intercom, cold and precise. "We have 18 months of documented evidence. Emails, financial records, falsified appraisals, testimony from co-conspirators. Your immunity doesn't cover federal RICO charges, Councilman. Ariana watched as the handcuffs went on. Watched as Richard Stone's face collapsed from outrage into something closer to terror. Watched as the man who destroyed her father was finally, irrevocably caught. She'd imagined this moment 1,000 times. Thought she'd feel triumph, vindication, savage joy. Instead, she just felt tired and free. Min-jae's arm came around her waist, steady and solid. "Breathe," he murmured against her ear. "It's over." But it wasn't.
Not quite yet.
The press conference happened 3 hours later at the federal building, the room packed with reporters and cameras and the electric tension of a story that would dominate news cycles for weeks. Sarah Chin stood at the podium, flanked by FBI brass, methodically dismantling every lie Stone had built his career on. Among the victims of this systematic scheme was James Kennedy, a small business owner whose commercial property was seized in 2023 under false pretenses. Mr. Kennedy attempted to challenge the fraudulent valuation through legal channels, but was blocked at every turn. He died believing his name was ruined and his life's work stolen. Chin paused, her gaze finding Ariana in the back of the room. Today, we're setting the record straight. James Kennedy was not a failed businessman. He was a victim of organized corruption at the highest levels of city government. The words hit Ariana like a tidal wave. She felt Min-jae's hand tighten around hers, anchoring her as cameras swiveled toward them, as reporters began shouting questions, as the narrative she'd carried for 2 years finally shattered. They left through the side exit, Min-jae's security creating a buffer against the media swarm. But once they reached his car, once the door closed and the world fell quiet, Ariana couldn't hold it together anymore. She broke. Not with silent tears this time, but with great heaving sobs that tore from somewhere deep in her chest. 2 years of grief and rage and exhaustion pouring out all at once. Min-jae pulled her into his lap, his arms wrapped around her like a fortress, his lips pressed to her temple as she shook apart. "He's free," she gasped against his chest. "My father's finally free." "You're free," Min-jae corrected quietly. "You don't have to hide anymore. You don't have to be invisible. You can be exactly who you were always meant to be." She pulled back to look at him, this dangerous, complicated man who'd given up everything to give her this moment. His face was all hard angles in the dim light of the car, but his eyes held something soft and fierce and utterly devoted. "No more hiding," she whispered, her hands framing his face. "No more walls. No more running. No more hiding," he agreed. "Not for either of us." When he kissed her, it tasted like freedom and promises, and the beginning of something neither of them had to fight alone anymore. It tasted like justice served and debts paid, and the kind of love that burned away everything false until only truth remained. They pulled apart slowly, breathlessly. Outside, Chicago sprawled beneath them, the city that had nearly destroyed them both, now the city where they'd rebuild everything on their own terms. "Take me home," Ariana said softly. Min-jae's smile was rare and genuine, the expression transforming his face from dangerous to devastating. Already there. And for the first time in 2 years, Ariana Cole believed him. 3 months later, Ariana stood in front of the building that would change everything. The storefront on South Halsted had good bones, high ceilings, original hardwood floors, large windows that let in the kind of natural light that made even Chicago's gray November mornings feel hopeful. The previous tenant had been an insurance office that went under during the pandemic. Now the space was gutted down to brick and potential, waiting to become something new. "You're sure about the location?" Min-jae asked, his hand resting on the small of her back as they surveyed the empty interior. "I can get you something in the loop. More prestigious." Better foot traffic. Ariana shook her head, her gaze traveling across the neighborhood visible through the windows. Working-class families. Small businesses. The kind of people who needed legal help but couldn't afford the downtown firms that had once employed her. This is exactly right, she said. This is where people like my father would come. This is where we do the work that matters. The contractor's quote sat in her bag: renovations, furniture, technology, staffing for the first 6 months. The settlement from the city had been substantial, compensation for her father's stolen property and her own blacklisting, but starting a non-profit legal clinic would consume most of it. She'd run the numbers a dozen times, tweaked the budget, applied for grants. It would be tight, sustainable only if she lived carefully, and the clinic gained traction. She was ready. More than ready. For the first time since her father's death, she had a purpose that didn't involve hiding or surviving, but actually fighting back against the system that had crushed so many others. I have something for you, Min-jae said, his tone carefully neutral in the way that meant he was about to do something she'd argue about. He pulled an envelope from his coat pocket. Consider it a grand opening gift. Ariana eyed him suspiciously. Min-jae Kong, if you bought this building. I didn't buy the building. Open it. She pulled out the papers inside, her lawyer's eyes scanning the legal language automatically. It took her 3 seconds to understand what she was reading. Then her breath stopped entirely. You bought back the community center. Technically, I bought back the naming rights and secured a long-term operational lease with an option to purchase when Tessek's ready to divest. Min-jae's expression remained carefully controlled, but she could see the satisfaction beneath. He was more amenable to negotiation than expected. Apparently, federal scrutiny after Stone's arrest made him eager to appear cooperative and community-minded. Ariana's hands trembled on the papers. How much did this cost you? Less than you're thinking. Tez-suk wanted liquidity for overseas investments. I wanted my mother's legacy back. He stepped closer, his hands settling on her shoulders. And I wanted you to stop carrying guilt that was never yours to carry. Her throat tightened. I didn't ask you to. I know. That's why I did it. His thumb brushed along her jaw, tilting her face up to meet his eyes. You've spent 3 months building something that matters, something that helps people the system failed. Let me do the same. Let us both honor the people we lost by making sure their legacies survive. The words hit her square in the chest. She thought about her father, about Min-jae's mother, about all the people caught in the machinery of corruption and greed, about how easy it would be to let that pain turn into bitterness, into a wall that kept the world out. But they'd chosen something different. They'd chosen to fight. The Kennedy Justice Project, she said softly, testing the words. That's what I'm calling the clinic. After my father. It's perfect. Min-jae's smile was genuine, transforming his usually controlled expression into something warm and devastating. And I have a proposal. Another one? The center has space we're not using. 2nd floor, eastern wing. About 1,500 square feet. His hand moved to the back of her neck, fingers threading through her hair. I want you to take it, rent-free for the first 2 years. Expand the clinic, hire more attorneys, reach more people. Ariana stared at him, this complicated, dangerous man who'd walked into her life when she was invisible and made her remember what it felt like to matter. Partners, she said finally. Not charity. I pay rent when the clinic's sustainable and we collaborate on community outreach programs. My legal expertise, your resources and connections. Partners, Min-jae agreed. In business. He paused, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. And in everything else. It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. In everything else. The kiss was slow and deep, and tasted like promises they'd both keep this time. When they pulled apart, Ariana rested her forehead against his, her hands fisted in his coat. "I love you," she whispered. "I don't think I've said that clearly enough. You've said it every day." His voice was rough with emotion. "Every time you trusted me. Every time you let me see the parts of you that were broken and didn't apologize for them. Every time you chose to stay when leaving would have been safer." She pulled back to look at him properly. "You know I'm going to be difficult, right? I'm going to argue with you about cases, about strategy, about everything." "I'm counting on it." His smile turned wicked. "I like you difficult." 3 months ago, she'd been invisible. A ghost serving water in rooms where power was traded like currency. Now she stood in an empty storefront that would become a beacon for people who needed help, partnered with a man who'd burned down walls to give her back her name, her purpose, her life. The city outside the windows looked different now. Not the place that had destroyed her, but the place where she'd rebuild everything her father had fought for. "Come on," Min-jae said, taking her hand. "Let's go home and plan how we're going to change the city." Ariana laced her fingers through his, feeling the solid warmth of his palm against hers. "We already did." But they walked out together anyway, into the sharp November wind and the work still ahead and the life they'd build on their own terms. A life where justice wasn't just an idea, but a promise they'd keep every single day. And there you have it, my fierce hearts. From invisible waitress to unstoppable force. From a man who ruled through fear to a man who learned that real power is knowing when to sacrifice everything for the person who sees you, truly sees you, beneath all the armor. This is what happens when two broken people refuse to stay broken. When a woman who lost everything decides one clause in a contract is worth risking her life to expose. When a dangerous man discovers that love isn't weakness, it's the most ruthless strength there is. Ariana and Min-jae didn't just get justice. They became it. They took their trauma, their loss, their rage at a system designed to crush people like them, and they turned it into something that would protect others. The Kennedy Justice Project isn't just a clinic. It's a declaration. It's proof that the powerful don't always win, that sometimes the invisible become legendary, that love and justice can burn just as hot as revenge, but they last longer. So here's my question for you. What would you risk everything for? What clause would make your hands go cold? What injustice would force you to break your silence even if it meant facing the most dangerous person in the room? Drop your answers in the comments. I read every single one, and your stories fuel these midnight tales we share together. If this story grabbed you by the throat and didn't let go, hit that like button and smash subscribe so you never miss another dark romance that'll keep you up past your bedtime. Share this with someone who loves morally gray antiheroes, brilliant heroines who don't need saving, and romances where the stakes are life, death, and everything worth fighting for. And listen, I want to hear from you. Did you see Min-jae's sacrifice coming? Did Ariana's moment at the press conference wreck you the way it wrecked me? Should I explore more stories about powerful, dangerous men brought to their knees by women who refuse to stay invisible? Tell me everything in the comments because this community, this space we've built together, thrives on your voices, your passion, your hunger for stories that matter. Coming up next, I've got another tale of power, corruption, and the kind of love that doesn't ask permission. It takes what it wants and burns everything else to the ground. You're not going to want to miss it. Until then, remember, the most dangerous thing in any room isn't the man with power. It's the woman with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Stay fierce. Stay hungry. And never, ever let them make you invisible. I'll see you in the next story.